Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Rocket MSP podcast. I'm Steve Taylor, your host, and welcome to the show that asks the tough questions of vendors. Today, I'm joined by Jacob Martin from ScopeStack. Thank you, Jacob. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
Absolutely, man. So, for people that don't know who you are, can you give us a quick background of
Sure.
your accolades, if you will?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked in the MSP space for going over a decade, probably 15 years. Worked at an MSP for quite a while. Did every job there pretty much. Became COO. Left COO to come to a place called ScopeStack. I saw a very big need, and that ScopeStack could fit that need, and I love helping people. So took the plunge, left my previous position, and came over here the first of the year. Really enjoying it so far. Just a lot to learn, a lot of meeting a lot of good people, and trying to improve the managed services space.
Awesome. So you'll notice that today I wrote this long, fancy title for today. It's called Expert Insights, Navigating the Pre-Sales Process for MSPs with Jacob Martin, VP of Sales at ScopeStack. So that sounds really awesome.
Sounds pretty important. I think, it makes me feel good that my name's in there anyway.
I mean, I'm the host. I'm the show, so I don't need my name in the title. All right,
kind of a big deal.
I pretend I am, and that's what matters.
That's right.
So let's do this. Before we dive into all these questions I've got, I want to start by defining what is pre-sales, because there's this whole sales and marketing engine that MSPs should be building, and ScopeStack is a very, I'll call it, specific part of that engine, in your eyes at least.
Right.
So how do we define pre-sales so that way the people that are watching or listening know what we're about to talk about?
So I think there's a couple of different aspects to a pre-sales role, if you will. Pre-sales in the MSP space is based around services most of the time. So there's pre-sales for product, but there's also pre-sales for services. I would say pre-sales is more of, going out to speak to a customer, finding out what they need, making sure that you have a complete list of a scope of work for the customer to make sure that you've qualified that deal as best you can to make sure that you fit all the needs the customer has. That's before you speak to technical delivery or anyone like that. Pre-sales is that motion of almost consulting with the customer to kind of drive their technology and help them see, these are the things that I see. This is probably what we're going to need to do. This is the level of effort it's going to take to get it done. Here's the kind of resources we're going to need to do it. And this is ultimately going to be your price in order to fulfill that need.
Guess it helps if I unmute myself every time without fail. All right, so that's cool. So what would you say is the most important aspect of a successful pre-sales process then?
I think that's two parts. I think that there's not really a most important. I think that there's two things. One, listening to your customer is incredibly important. If anything, that's probably the most if we had to name one. But I think actually delivering what you sell, knowing that you can deliver what you're telling your customer. So there's never a time that I think you should fluff it and just assume that something can be done. So I think making sure that you are telling your customer something that you know to be true. And if you don't know, then tell them you don't know.
I mean, that seems like wise advice for anybody in any role. If you don't know something, don't fake it till you make it. As fun as that sounds, it's probably not going to get you where you expect to go.
It might be fun at first until you actually don't make it, and then it turns into a disaster. So
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you go about identifying the needs and the pain points of a prospect?
So asking the right questions, one, but also sometimes the customer may not know what their needs are. They just know their pain points. So I think it's up to us as technology providers and solutions experts to be driving the technology for the customer. They shouldn't necessarily come to us and say, "Hey, I'm worried about getting phished. I need security awareness training." They should say something along the lines of, "I'm getting these weird emails. I don't know what to do about it." And then we should provide, "Hey, have you ever thought about security awareness training?" Something of that nature. So asking the right questions to define their pain points, to see where they're if they're losing money because of a failed process, how we can fix that process, things of that nature. You really got to dig in and really try to become a part of that business, whoever you're serving. It shouldn't be a one-off. We're a third party. It should be, we want to be a part of your business and help you grow. What pain points do you have? Where do you see deficiencies that you think technology could help?
And uh, can you talk about some of the common challenges MSPs face during the pre-sales process? And I want to talk not about the I need to go talk to my boss or I need to go talk to my wife before spending this money. Soft no. I'm talking about the challenges that MSPs probably create for themselves.
Yeah, we've done that in the past as well. I think everyone has. To be honest, I think that um, sometimes MSPs want to put in a specific solution because they know that it's the best thing for the customer. But sometimes the customer doesn't understand why it's the best thing for them, especially when it hurts their wallet. And I think that could be one thing. For example, if you're talking to a customer and you know that they're opening in the next 10 years, they're going to open 7 locations. It's probably a better idea to do some cloud hosted services instead of doing an on-premise server. However, the cost is probably going to be higher, and that in the long run, it may not be. If you're doing a 7 to 10 year analysis of pricing, they're probably going to see the balance, and they'll say, "Wait, that's not that much difference." And sometimes the MSP tries to push that a little bit too hard. At the end of the day, the customer is not always right, but they are always right because it's their money, right? So I think they back themselves into the corner sometimes, and it's difficult to explain some of those technologies to people who don't understand the technology.
Mm.
So I think that's one common thing that I see people face. For example, if I had a client that wanted to move, he wanted to move to cloud storage, but he had no idea why. He just had heard, it's more uptime and this and that. And I asked him, do you know the cost difference? For him, he had one location. He had never been down. He had never lost any kind of data. We had a very, very good backup solution in place for this guy. And he was just like, well, I've heard this and I read this. And so it's kind of the opposite scenario, right, of what I just described. So it's explaining that you don't actually need that. Like, not saying we wouldn't rather have it. We would rather manage it that way 100%, but you don't need to spend that kind of money to perform the same exact way that you're going to perform now. Like, there's really not an advantage.
And I gotta say, one of the most common ways that I used to set myself up for failure was by simply not having a pricing conversation toward the beginning. And I'm talking again pre-sales. Like I want to qualify everybody because I think there's a difference between a prospect and an active customer, right? If it's an active customer, you've already got an idea of what their budget's like, what they're probably going to say yes and no to, etc. Right? When it's a prospect, this is a new relationship. There may not be a relationship at all. It may be, your first or second time talking with them. And you need to make sure you're not wasting your time. I think that's one of the biggest challenges MSPs create for themselves is they waste their own time. They,
100%.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure you're going to tell us how ScopeStack later on is going to help us waste a whole lot less time. right?
Sure.
Cool. So since we talked about pricing, what role would you say price plays in the pre-sales process on
I
your
would say
side of
it's,
things?
I mean, I would say it's a pretty large portion of it. I think that it's all in the way that you explain and lay out your plan. But I do think at the end of the day, it's a major factor, because at the end of the day, that's where it impacts their bottom line. So I think it's very important to be transparent up front. And I think your very first and second conversations, you need to be able to make sure that that customer feels confident and can trust you. Building trust and knowing, letting them know that you're an honest person is definitely going to weigh in heavily when you say this is how much money it's going to cost. But I think cost is a very big factor. I think it's second to building trust, because at the end of the day, if you build trust and you have a good plan and you lay it out and you're honest and say, this is probably the timeline that it's going to take to get this, this isn't going to be something that happens overnight. I know you want the solution next week. It's going to take that long to even ship, that kind of stuff. And you just be completely transparent. The price point kind of it's relevant, but it's not as relevant if you set the correct expectation.
So let's talk about something else that MSPs may not do a great job with. Let's talk about project scoping. First, can you discuss the importance of project scoping?
Oh yeah, that there's multiple parts of project scoping. I think that I think it's the most important part of the project. I think building a correct scope of work is more important than the timeline, more important than scheduling. I think it's more important than even the technical delivery, because it determines the technical delivery's outcome.
So how do we scope a project correctly?
Well, you're asking somebody who works at ScopeStack, so that's kind of difficult for me to answer. But,
Fair. Okay, so let me rephrase the question. Let's say we, as an MSP, and most MSPs don't have this problem, I'm sure, but let's say maybe we don't have things properly documented, and maybe the owner is the only person, or maybe it's like one or two guys, and everything just kind of lives in their heads, right? Now, again, most MSPs don't do that, because most MSPs are doing this right? So
now there is that one guy who has the super secret notepad on his computer with all the data in there. That's
yes,
there's
and
that
that's
guy.
the guy we're worried about right now.
That's the guy.
So let's talk about him. How does he say, all right, this customer wants to migrate from on-prem Exchange to Microsoft 365? How do you begin to scope that project when you don't actually have a defined process for how you're going to do this? It's like you have to do two things. One, you have to figure out, what do I need to do to make this happen? And then two, what are my costs involved and what can I charge?
Correct. And then on top of that, you're figuring that out to give to the customer, right? You're building that scope of work to quote the customer. So there's a lot of questions, a lot of investigation to do with the customer. How many mailboxes do you need? How many aliases do you need? How many, do you need, what kind of office suite do you need? Do you just need Exchange Online? There's so many questions that have to be answered. First and foremost, you have to ask the right questions. But not only do you have to build that scope of work to give to your customer, your technical delivery team has to build a matching scope of work in the PSA tool. So I think there's a lot that goes into that portion. Mostly investigation and setting clear expectations with your customer. Are we going to do MFA? If we're doing, are we going to go ahead and do that now? There was plenty of times where I would scope out something and just assume that the technical delivery team knew we're gonna do MFA with this. It's kind of hand in hand. That shame on me for assuming, what's in my head in my super secret notepad may not be what's on someone else's, right? So that guy has a hard time.
It's almost like you're saying, we need to know what we're doing before we can scope a project.
Yeah, you definitely need to do your homework before you start. I think if you some people do jump right in and they've done this before. I've done this before. That's a horrible way to go about doing things, because what you did before, it may be completely the same project and completely different from customer A to customer B.
Yeah, small business server doesn't exist anymore, guys. You didn't do this before.
Oh my goodness, that needs to burn.
All right.
I think everybody would agree. Small business server was a bad decision.
I liked it.
No. Well, you might like it until you try to migrate from it. I guess maybe that's a better way.
I never migrated from it for a client.
Oh,
so
wow, it's a train wreck.
Yeah, I really liked it. Now, I stopped using it after 2003.
Okay.
So I know I'm older than I look. Maybe, I don't know. It's the camouflage. All right. So, how do you ensure your proposal accurately reflects? Yes, I'm making sure I said my words correctly. How do you ensure your proposal accurately reflects the scope of a project?
Language matters. Your language fields have to match very close to what your technical delivery team is going to deliver. I would say, I think that is I think there's approvals that have to happen. There's a lot of things that go into building a scope of work accurately. I mean, you have to build the scope first. You have to investigate, find out what you need. You have to build the steps. You have to look at the resources. You have to look at how much those resources get paid and choose which rate to charge for each process and line of, like, whatever that line of business is, and their level of effort, calculate that. There's a lot that goes into that. But even more than that, if that language in each task doesn't match the language that the technical delivery team is expecting to build, then they're going to not deliver what you sold. And that makes a liar out of the pre-sales person, which is something every pre-sales person should worry about. And I know I did. Always worried that I'm telling somebody something that really can't happen. Even though I knew it could happen, I didn't know how it was going to happen because I'm not the one writing that scope. So
now, what's the difference between the proposal and a statement of work? Does ScopeStack have two different things there?
So the scope of work would be what you're building out in order to give the statement of work, if that makes sense, or the proposal. I would consider the proposal and the statement of work the same thing.
Okay.
The scope of work and a statement of work I would consider two different things, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. It does.
Because sometimes you don't want, so sometimes when you have a scope of work, it's going to have a lot of technical language built around what that service is, right? But if you give that to a customer, they're not going to understand the gibberish that you put on there. So a statement of work may not even include all the tasks in the scope of work. It may just say the top level, this is a wireless AP deployment, and underneath it isn't going to talk about building out SSIDs and all that. They have no clue what all that is. So sometimes you just leave that out. I think John, the founder of ScopeStack, one of the founders, he always says, you may not want to show the customer how the sausage is made. And that's true. A lot of times you don't want to, because it's just, you're going to get the deer in the headlights. They're going to have 1,000 questions, and it's going to lead to prolonging the project when they really, not saying they don't need to know, but if they're not technical enough to understand it, which most aren't, they shouldn't be. If you're talking to a doctor that's, a neurosurgeon, he's working on people's, brains. He doesn't need to worry about what an SSID is. You know what I mean? So,
Fair.
So I would say that a statement of work or a proposal would be the same, but a scope of work is completely different.
So how do you leverage feedback from the customer or prospect during the process, during the pre-sales process, to improve your proposals?
I'm big on feedback. I love feedback, positive or negative. I think that you can always improve. However, I think that it's really great to give your team words of affirmation if they have done something really great. If they get really great feedback, tell your team, make sure they know they did a great job. But if there is a mistake, or if there's something that was a little slower than the timeline should have been, that feedback definitely helps to say, okay, we really need to hone in on this process and find out, what did we do that we could have done differently to make this not take 5 hours and only take 3? what changes could we have made before we handed this to the customer? Or, if we would have planned this differently, would it have possibly caused this not to happen? I think feedback is critical in that, because if it's honest feedback, and not, something that's, you get some of those, no customer's ever done this, I'll just stop there. But no customer's ever told us, that we should have done something faster, or maybe we should have done this better or something, and it not be true. So that's never happened to any MSP, I'm sure.
Ooh, rapid security response. Enter your password to apply the macOS security response.
Ooh.
What's the worst that could happen? Let's restart.
Have you tried rebooting?
Oh boy. So we've got really active chat today, and I'm loving this. Right now they're not even talking about what we're talking about. They're talking about password managers. This is hilarious.
That's great.
So, all right, let's see. LastPass, don't recommend it.
I think you just did.
No. Just because the words came out of my mouth does not mean I'm saying buy it. All right, so let's see here. What are some best practices for managing expectations during the pre-sales process?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I think conversations. I think you can gauge the customer by having conversations. I don't think, if you're in the middle of a project, there should be two things happening, and a lot of people may disagree with me because people hate meetings. But I do think there should be an overview, not a meeting, not some kind of, let's not waste a whole bunch of high-level resources time talking about tasks, but there should be a high-level overview of your projects internally. And I think that should be relayed to the customer externally more frequently than not. I would say weekly. If you're in the process of a project, I would think at least weekly, you should have a conversation between the team that's delivering, the technical delivery team, pre-sales, and then the customer. I'm a big advocate of communication.
And I know that there are some people that subscribe to one of the many different sales trainings out there, like Sandler, for example. And like I said, there's a bunch. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but trust me, there's a bunch. So many of them say, like, they almost dictate, here's how you should run your sales engine, right? Here's what a sales meeting should look like. Here's what everything should, get that, make an agreement at the beginning of the meeting, so that way it's okay for them to tell you no, things like that, right? So how do you customize your pre-sales approach, that thing that Sandler says don't change? How do you change it based on the size of the prospect or project?
That's
because you're not going to do the same thing if someone's like, hey, I need a new laptop, versus, hey, I need to migrate 1,000 mailboxes.
This is true. That's true. I will say, I'll give you that, but I disagree on some of the other stuff that Sandler says in that aspect. I think that every customer's project should be treated exactly the same, as far as they deserve the same attention.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that building a second or third domain controller is any less important than an email migration. I don't think that deploying 50 to 100 computers is any less important than deploying a network infrastructure stack. I think that they deserve the same amount of dedication, same amount of resource allocation, if you will, to, as far as this person is an expert in this subject matter. This person's a security analyst. He should be installing a firewall, not a network person. I think that kind of thought should go into every project. But you are correct. If you're deploying a laptop or you're deploying a server, obviously there's a difference there. And I think that's going to be a case by case basis. There's a lot of people that have project teams or there's other people that have subject matter experts that work only in that specific arena, like network security, and then there's some that have a mixture of both. There's lots of different scenarios, but I would say just knowing your client probably would help you more than knowing their size. So it doesn't matter if you have a client that has 50 employees or you have a client that has 2,000 employees. If the client that has 2,000 employees is really laid back and they've been a customer for a really long time and they're just, they're very kind and understanding, and then you have one that has 50 employees but they're a real jerk, you're going to have to manage that differently. You're going to have to wear kid gloves around the 50 client and not so much on the 2,000 person client. I think it's more about the client than the project, I guess, is probably the easiest way to say that.
So let's pivot a little bit here. Let's start talking about success or measuring success. So what would you say some key metrics or KPIs that MSPs can and should track during the pre-sales process are? And don't worry about explanation of why or any of that. Just give me top level overview, bullet points. What are some metrics that we should be tracking?
I would say, there's quite a few. I'd say that the two most important to me in say a pre-sales process is going to be your buying window and your conversation rates. That's probably the two that I would go with.
You say conversation rights?
Rate, like how often you're having a conversation.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. It's the southern drawl, man. It gets everybody. Don't worry.
All right. Now, how do you use these metrics to identify areas of improvement in the process?
Sure. So I think you should identify your buying window, and if your buying window starts to look like it's closing, then you probably would measure that against a low conversation rate. I think that it matters to have the amount of conversations you have is going to allow that window to stay open longer, or you deliver the project, right? So those are the two biggest ones that I follow. In my opinion, if you have somebody who's ghosting you, that doesn't mean they're not going to still come through, but it also doesn't mean that you don't need to be sure that they understand we have all these other projects. Don't be afraid to tell your customer, if we can't get an answer by this week, we're going to have to push this project behind other projects.
And I just want to define buying window is, I know on average it takes me 90 days to sell an MSP proposal. So 90 days is my buying window. And if I've got a sales proposal out there for 105 days, the chances of this closing is next to nothing or whatever, right?
Yeah, I would assume that they've already went somewhere else. That's when they get the, hey, is there any interest left? Should we still be having conversations? One of those kind of discussions should be had if you make that 90 win. You should probably have that before the 90 window's up.
Okay. Now, conversation rates, is this just how frequently you're having touches with the client?
I would consider them touch. Yeah, I would consider them touch points, but I would also consider them moving the needle. Like, depends on what the conversation is. If it's just, hey, we're still investigating or we're still looking at your product. Okay, well, your buying window is 90 days. It's been 30. What next steps do we need to take? Is there another demo? Should we come do a walkthrough? Whatever the case may be. If we're talking about MSPs, it's probably going to be more along the lines of, we know the buying window was 90 days. I'm sure you're getting other quotes for services. What would help us? What would help us get to the top of that list? Is there anything we could do differently to make sure that we're providing the most value that you can see between us and our competitors? Something that would really push that needle, not just, oh, we're still looking. Okay, well, don't just let them stop with that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really drive that conversation to a point where you're building a relationship. You're not just selling them something. You're building a relationship with them to make sure that they understand they can trust you and that you're going to do what you can to really help their organization.
All right, I've got 3 more questions I'm going to do. Okay. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity that's watching live. If you have any sales questions, not scope stack questions, sales questions. Pop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to get those answered for you. So let's talk about sales pipeline. There's got to be metrics that you need to know how many people I need to get in my pipeline before, because it's a funnel, right? So I need X number of people because that's going to convert into X number of meetings, which will convert into X number of proposals. How do you measure that? Is there an app?
There's not an app that I've used. Maybe I'm just old school, but I measure it by what the MSP can actually handle.
Okay.
And I know that sounds crazy, but if you were to take on more clients than you can support, your previous client, your current clients that may have been clients for years are going to suffer. So I was always of the idea of, this is how many clients that I know we can actually handle per month. And that was how I built my funnel out. And I basically would go in and say, okay, I think this one's going to land, and I'd get the buying window. This is a long-term sale. This is a large customer. They might take, 6 months to actually come back and actually say, we're ready. So I would put them in a different funnel. You have to build your deal stages. I use HubSpot. So when I say deal stage, I'm referring to HubSpot. But my funnels always went in deal stages. So I would have, 6 months out, 90 days out, whatever the case may be. And I would actually look at where we were internally. And if it were that I thought we could take on another one, then I would reach back out to someone and say, hey, we're actually going to have a spot open in May, whatever. If you're ready to onboard, we can push that up a bit, because I would try to lay that expectation out. Most companies have contracts with their current IT provider, so their buying window is already set. They're like, okay, my contract's up in January. I need to make my buying window between November and December because I need to be ready in January. And then we would always tell them, it's better to have 30 days with both of us, because there's going to be some collaboration that's going to have to happen. And a lot of times people would just cut them off. Like if you get a customer from another MSP and they are disgruntled, they'll just cut them off. Like, oh, well, you're done. So if they do that and they still have 30 days, a month left, they're not getting paid for that 30 days. So it's always good to make sure you're onboarding 30 days prior to them leaving their other MSP. In case they're not professional MSP people,
I like that. That is very good advice for everyone here. So let's talk about financial metrics. What are the best metrics that we should be tracking for, our sales people when it comes to success?
For your sales, can you ask that question again? I'm sorry, I kind of missed that. For your financials for your sales people?
Yeah. So what financial metrics or KPIs should we be tracking for the sales process, if you will? So how, for example, do you determine what a quota should be if you're developing a sales process? Like I shouldn't say, all right, well, I'm going to make a sales process and sign up for something and give myself $100,000 a month quota, because that just seems ridiculous.
Well, being realistic definitely is key. And I think you should, it's going to depend on the MSP again. That's a very difficult question in the MSP world. Selling MSP services are, and we're talking about customer acquisition, not projects, right at this point. Customer acquisition, that's what I'm talking about. Customer acquisition, you have to measure by what you're able to bring in currently before you bring someone else in, right? Because a lot of times you're fishing in the same pond there if you're local, right? So a lot of these MSPs that are, we'll say small to medium, they're regional at best, right, as to who they're trying to serve, and you're fishing in the same ponds. So I think it really depends on the MSP. That's a very difficult question for me to answer as far as KPIs go for a salesperson on customer acquisition. Now, if it's inside sales, that's a little easier because you kind of know these are the projects that are going to be coming up. If you're driving your customer's technology properly, you know what they're going to need in the next year to 2 years. So you can technically go in, you can have that person budget for their customers, their subset of customers, if you will. Say they're everything south of here. This is your region. These are your customers. I need you to own their technology, know it, drive it, and then you can basically budget from that. Well, this customer needs 35 computers by the end of Q4. Well, then we need to go ahead and budget for that. And you can go ahead and set a KPI based on those projects. You can set metrics that way. New customer acquisition is a little bit more tricky. And I think that really depends on if your person is more of a business development cycle or a sales cycle. And I consider those things two different things. Business development mostly is long plays. You might land a huge client, but it may take you 2 years to do it. Whereas you can land 5 or 6 small clients in 2 months. It just depends on what kind of person you're hiring to sell. If that makes sense.
It does.
Sorry, I don't have a really good answer for that one. I always, when I did customer acquisition for the MSP I was at, it was more of a natural thing. I build relationships with people. I get a lot of referrals because of it. And so you never really know when something's going to just drop in your lap, or if it's one of those things that, hey, I've got this in my pipeline. I'm sure that I'm going to land these 3 in the next 5 months. Every customer is different. So you never really know how much you're going to charge that customer. We charge based on endpoints due to network complexity. So like if they had 100 endpoints in one office, it's going to be a cheaper rate per endpoint than someone who has 6 offices and 100 endpoints, because the complexity is higher. So we would charge more for that. So I know that's kind of a different way of doing things than most MSPs, but that's the way we did it. So it was really difficult to say, hey, I'm going to land this doctor's office in 6 weeks. There's 30 employees, but they got 22 servers. So it might be a little more complex than a doctor's office. It's all cloud with 50 users. So that was really a difficult metric to follow for me.
I have one last sales related question, and it's a complex one.
Okay.
So I'm going to call this a 2-parter. So how do you measure a prospect's satisfaction of the sales process? Like, is it as simple as they bought from me, so they liked me, they didn't buy, so they didn't? Or is it more nuanced? Like, yeah, we know they liked us, but it just wasn't in the budget, or they went a different direction for another reason, and then the second part of that is, how do these metrics inform your business or sales and marketing strategy?
That's a fantastic question. So I think that feedback is key. I don't think that any one sale is either purchased or not purchased for the same reason as the next one. So what I mean by that is, let's just say, for example, I quote MSP services for customer A, and I quote MSP services for customer B. And then, another MSP comes in and they quote the same exact quote as me. The difference is, let's just say I don't win customer A, but I do win customer B. Let's say customer A is a manufacturer, customer B is healthcare. Well, my company specializes in healthcare, which is why we landed customer B, not customer A. They specialize in manufacturing or whatever, right? So I think there's a lot of factors to that, as to why you don't land a deal or why you do. At the end of the day, I think that the metrics behind it is a lot of feedback. I think you need to ask. That you need to ask questions. Why did we not land this, or why did we land this? Because at the end of the day, they're going to come to you and they're going to tell you the truth. Either your price was too high, common, that's a common thing. This person outbid you. And what you find most of the time is 2 years later, they come back and call you and say, I really should have went with you guys and not worried about the cost. That's God's honest truth. I've had that happen more times than not. And most of the time, I had one customer that came to me and they literally told me, I did everything you told me in the consultation to do. I bought the same backup solution. I bought the fiber from Spectrum. I bought the same access points. I bought the same switch that you said I needed. I bought the same firewall that you said I needed. I just went with this company because they were less expensive to manage it all. And I said, okay, you're calling me why? And she said blatantly, her words verbatim were, because they were terrible and I should have known I was getting what I was paying for. So you can use metrics like that, that kind of feedback in your next conversation. You can use stories. Stories sell. That's just the bottom line. Stories will sell you faster than anything. So if you go into a customer's office who you feel like is like, I got all these quotes, I got to look at pricing, and then you pull that out and you tell them that story, it's going to persuade them to think, at least, maybe he's right. Maybe I do need to listen, and maybe I do need to pay attention that I'm getting what I'm paying for. Don't undervalue yourself, and what you bring to the table. But at the same time, you have to be competitive, and you have to listen to your customer, and you have to instill trust and confidence. If you go in there and you have no idea what you're talking about and you're not confident in what you're saying, they should go somewhere else. So if you get feedback that said, yeah, well, my salesperson just was kind of all over the place, they didn't really make me feel like they knew what was best for me, then you need to use that to coach your employees, right? So two-parter, I would say you need to ask why or why not. Don't get upset when someone specializes in something and you don't get a sale because you didn't specialize in it and they do. It happens. We got a lot of healthcare customers because we specialize in healthcare, and we beat out some really quality MSPs because we specialize in healthcare. And so that just happens. So use those metrics to either say, we're going to dive in and we're going to learn HIPAA laws. We're going to specialize in healthcare. If you really want to make a difference in your business and you're willing to put in the work, then you can say you put in the work and you specialize in healthcare, and next time you'll have something to go up against. So ask the questions. That would be my answer. Ask the questions and find out how to be better.
That's fantastic feedback. So thank you for coming on here and doing this, Jacob. I do have some questions for you regarding ScopeStack. Elevator pitch. What is it?
So ScopeStack is a pre-sales automation tool, a CPQ tool. It's basically, think about it this way. If you go out and you were to scope a project for a customer in pre-sales, typically you go through the process we already discussed. You're going to have to build out something in Microsoft Excel, probably put a proposal together in Word, give the proposal to the customer where it looks all pretty in Word, then come back, take the Excel spreadsheet, go up against your projects team, whiteboard everything, try to figure everything out, find out the solutions, and then probably go back to your customer and say, well, I missed this little part, whatever. But then you're going to have to go in and you're going to take that, build out your scope of work, assign a resource, a line of business, if you will, the amount of hours that it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. You have to build all those calculations in. And then after all that's said and done, your customer gets the official quote, they sign off on it. Then you're going to have to go to your project delivery team and say, hey, I need you to take this and replicate it inside the PSA tool. So at ScopeStack, go ahead.
Now you said CPQ. What is that?
Mm-hmm. So CPQ is basically it's a quoting tool. It stands for configure price quote, not customer price quote.
Okay.
You'll see that. You'll see those tools, but most of them are for product, not services. So the difference with ScopeStack is it's built for IT providers, by IT providers, and it's based around services. So most CPQ tools are like if we needed to, sell you a switch or something of that nature. And it can sell anything, whether it's a roof and shingles or a switch, right? They're not made for IT providers as much. There are some. But what we do is we build it around the services. So it actually builds the scope of work and attaches it to a resource and a level of effort. So with us, you don't have to do those steps that I just said the MSP typically does. With ScopeStack, what you do is you go in and you say, okay, I want to do a firewall install. You look at your standard services, which we have over 50 already built in there that we just give you. You can manipulate those how you want, save them how you want. And so you go in, you say, okay, I need a firewall install. You type in firewall installation, click, review, and it reviews every step. You push it over to your project. It goes into your project, and you have it right there, all your steps, your level of effort, your resource, which resource rates defined. You should never charge the same rate for a consultant that makes this much versus a security analyst that makes this much. They should have different rates. You're losing money if you're not doing that. So it combines all of those things, calculates all those things, builds you out a clean scope of work. You hit generate, generates a DocuSign integration document that you can send to your customer. They sign off on it. You push it over to the PSA and it builds it right in there. So if you have ConnectWise Manage or AutoTask, I love both of those, but everybody knows it's terrible to build a project in those. It's absolutely horrifying to build a project inside those. So with ScopeStack, what your pre-sales builds, your technical delivery team is going to deliver because you push it directly over and it doesn't change. All the language is there, all the steps are in there. But again, you don't have to show the customer how the sausage is made. You can say, send this with these limited amount of information, line items, calculations, everything gets pushed over. It's an automation tool for your pre-sales process. And there's so many different things that I could talk about it. It's very difficult to do in a 30-second elevator pitch. I can tell you that.
No, that's awesome. And I got to say, my next question you already answered, because it was going to be, how does ScopeStack help MSPs streamline their sales process?
Right. We've actually seen, we've had case studies to where people have said, it took us 3 weeks to do a scoping process and we cut it down to less than 24 hours. So, I mean, you can just imagine that productivity. I can scope a full network design in less than 10 minutes. That's remarkable. If I would have had that at my last job, there's a survey feature inside ScopeStack to where you could send an intern out to answer questions and it'll build the project. And then you say, okay, have this approved by a project manager. You send it over to the project manager. They spend 15 minutes reviewing it, approve it. And you didn't send the project manager on site for 3 hours to do a site walk. You send an intern. I mean, we have one client that does that quite a bit, and they are done really well. Their return is pretty high. Their ROI is enormous, actually, because of just that one feature. So it saves time. It makes sure that you have accurate scopes of work. You save those, so it's not like you're reinventing the wheel every time. We did a lot of infrastructure as a service at my last job. So we would onboard a client, and then we would do infrastructure as a service at the same time. So we were installing their firewalls, switches, access points, and onboarding all at the same time, right? That was one thing that we did a lot of. And we had it down to a science, but we still had to build it out, right? With ScopeStack, you can build a blueprint, which is multiple projects in one scope of work, and just say, apply this blueprint. And it pop up your onboarding, all the tasks that your onboarding needs, your firewall installation, all those steps. Even meeting with the customer steps are put in there, and all of it has a number attached to it for how much it costs. So you're not missing out on that money. Even travel and expense is built in. So you can choose travel and expense and set it static in the settings. It tacks it on to everything that you do that has to do with that service. I mean, there's so many different things that the tool can do. Like I said, man, we're about fixing problems in the MSP space. We want to be part of the community and really help. And that's one of the reasons that I came here, was because I'm like, this is something that could save pre-sales engineers or solutions architects weeks of time away from their family. Because that's what we do, right? We come home, we've had a day, we wait till our family goes to bed, because we don't want to spend time away from our family. So we wait till our family goes to bed, and then we're up till 2 a.m. building scopes of work. So we don't miss a deal, because we know time kills deals. But this, you can build it in front of the customer. I can sit in front of a customer, build a wireless survey, and have it signed off on before I leave the office.
That's amazing.
It's pretty remarkable. And again, it was all built to improve that. That's what John, one of the founders, that's what he did. He was a solutions architect for some of the big guys. I'm not going to name names, but one of the really big players, and he got tired of spending time away from his family, and he was like, there's got to be a better way to do this, and so that's how it was birthed, with IT providers' lives in mind. And so you're going to start seeing ScopeStack a lot in the community. We're really making a push to make sure that we are part of something bigger than just a product. MSPs spoke. They said, hey, I can't afford, some of the smaller MSPs are like, we can't afford this. So we went in, and while everyone else is raising their prices, we just lowered ours. We want to make the space better. So if we're going to do that, we have to put our money where our mouth is, right? So we came in guns blazing. Let's fix this. Let's make sure that everybody can afford it. Let's make sure that there's no capacity on this anymore. You can scope as many projects as you want. We got rid of that. we did a lot of price changing to make sure that every MSP can afford and use ScopeStack in a way that will improve their business.
So what's it cost?
So there's 3 different packages based on features. We do have a limit as to the users. So there's the Essentials package can scope projects, professional services all day long. They can pull an opportunity from your CRM into it. So if you use Autotask or ConnectWise or some of those guys, there's some other integrations that you can pull the opportunity in, and you can start scoping right then. If you wanted to integrate with your PSA, that would be the business plan. You can push it over to Autotask or ConnectWise Manage, Dynamics, some others, and there's the business plan there. And then the premium plan has workflow approval. So if you need all those things plus workflow approval, to where if you wanted to, say, have your security team check off on a project before it's ready to go out the door, you can do that. And it also has the surveys feature I was telling you about. You can answer questions as an intern and push it over. So our Essentials plan is $105, comes with 3 licenses, unlimited projects. Our business plan is $250, comes with 5 users, and it's unlimited capacity as well. And our premium plan is $750, comes with 10 users.
That's really awesome, man. And I'd say the pricing for the fact that an entry level MSP can get started for around 100 and what'd you say, 115 bucks, 105.
Yeah, 105. Yep.
Yeah, an entry level MSP can get started scoping projects, get more time with their families, and get to bed on time.
Right. Well, one thing about it is people don't charge. They should, but they do not charge for the time it takes to scope. I don't know if you've noticed that, but MSPs just leave that part. They just bake that in. The problem with that is you're not charging for your time. And I don't know anyone that doesn't charge at least $100 an hour. And if they are, they should at least charge $100 an hour.
Right.
So just add. I have one customer that literally just put scoping time $105. So one project pays for their ScopeStack account. They're small and it works for them.
That's perfect.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It pays for itself. One project pays for the platform a month, and you're good to go.
And that's a very, going back to KPIs, it's a very easy thing to measure. Did I sell a project this month? Yes or no?
Did I pay for the product I'm using? Yes or no? Yeah, I mean, it really is. And so I think everyone should be making money for the time they're spending, So.
I agree. Well, Jacob, I think I ran you well over the time that we allotted. So thank you for sticking around extra. I appreciate it. I would love to have you back to do a demo of ScopeStack. This thing,
yeah.
I've been, I know I got a demo of this already with my MSP, and it's cool. So I want to show the world, man.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. I really appreciate you taking the time. I enjoyed talking with you and getting to meet you. I think we spoke before a long time ago, but I've enjoyed actually getting to talk with you a little more.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jacob. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will catch you guys at the next episode. Take care.
Thanks, guys.